You really thought you'd walk away with the house, be grateful we left you the damn cabin. The words still echoed in Mara's ears as she stood in a courtroom alone, widowed, broke, and holding her baby daughter, while her in-laws smiled for the cameras. They took everything but a crumbling shack in the woods. But what they didn't know was what Daniel left behind, and what Mara was willing to fight for. Before we dive in, let me know. What time are you listening to this, and where are you? Drop a comment below, we'd love to hear from you. The cold light crept through the blinds like it didn't belong. It painted the kitchen in a tired blue, settling across the cracked linoleum and the bowl of half-eaten oatmeal Caleb had abandoned. Mara moved quickly, snatching up a bottle, rinsing it under the tap, scrubbing without looking. June stirred in her high chair, fists, bald, tight cheeks still flushed with sleep. "Hold on, baby," Mara murmured. "Just a second." She shook the bottle dry, wiped it on her sweatshirt, then bent over the little spiral-bound notebook open beside the sink. Rent. Gas. Formula. Her pen hesitated over the groceries line before moving again. Behind her, Caleb sat cross-legged on the floor, a workbook balanced on his lap lips, shaping each word from the spelling list. He didn't glance up when June began to fuss or when the radiator hissed angrily behind them. Noise had become part of their days. Mara checked the microwave clock. Coat shoes now. Bus in 10. Caleb popped up. "Where are my gloves?" Mara tossed them from the counter, her eyes snagging on the paper still taped to the fridge. A yellowing sheet with curled corners, ink blurred by an old water stain. She had meant to take it down. The words remained Daniel Service. 1 year today. Her gaze lingered longer than she allowed. Instinctively, her hand brushed the necklace hidden under her collar, the chain warm against her skin, the weight of a ring pressed above her heart. Fingers hovered, then dropped quickly, tucking the chain back out of sight. The hallway echoed with the slow creak of a walker. Mara opened the door as Mrs. Klein from 4B shuffled past, quilted coat fastened tight pink curlers still in place. "Mornin', sweetheart," the old woman said. "You look like you haven't slept in a week." Mara tried for a smile. "I'm on nights again. It's just a stretch." Mrs. Klein's brow furrowed, but she didn't push. A single nod, then she moved on. From behind, Caleb's voice rose. "Mama, when I grow big, I'll protect you and June like Dad used to." Mara paused, one hand steadying June's zipper. Her throat tightened. Instead of answering, she finished the zip, smoothing the hood over her daughter's fine hair. "Okay," she whispered at last. "That's sweet of you." Caleb grinned like he'd scored a victory. Outside, the air cut through their jackets the instant they stepped out. Mara cradled June against her chest, Caleb bouncing at her side as they reached the bottom of the stairs. She shifted her grip, pulled her collar higher. The silver glint of the ring caught the morning sun, then slipped back under the fabric. At the front door, the brass lock stuck as always. Her hand lingered there a moment longer than necessary, wondering if she was closing off something she might never step through again. The folding chair wobbled beneath Mara whenever she shifted, yet she forced herself still, both hands knotted in her lap. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a dull sheen across varnished wood and the faded seal on the back wall. Damp strands clung to her neck. She had walked through drizzle with June strapped to her chest and Caleb trailing behind. Now she sat alone at the back of the hearing room, no lawyer beside her, only a wrinkled court notice in her coat pocket and a heart pounding too loud to ignore. Across the aisle, the Ellisons looked like they had stepped off a magazine page. Roderick wore a tailored navy suit tie perfectly aligned. Corinne pinned pearls to a cream blazer, smiling faintly as though attending a luncheon. Marcus sat stiff beside them, gaze glued to his phone, tapping like he wished he were anywhere else. The judge read from a prepared statement, voice flat and indifferent. Per legal documentation and prior arrangements, the primary Ellison estate, including assets under Ellison Holdings Incorporated, shall remain in possession of said corporation overseen by acting CEO Roderick Ellison. Not a single glance drifted toward Mara. The family lawyer stood next. Adjusting his glasses with 2 fingers, he continued with forced politeness. There is, however, one property registered under Daniel Ellison's name and excluded from the holding company, which is hereby transferred to Mrs. Mara Ellison, a single-family cabin in North Hollow. He paused, the corners of his mouth threatening to twitch upward. It includes land and structure, both deeded to the late Mr. Ellison, with no outstanding debts. A snort echoed from the back. A few heads turned, but no one spoke. Corinne leaned toward Roderick, murmuring just loud enough to carry. She really thought she'd get the big house. Sweet girl, a rotting shed in the woods is better than nothing, I suppose. Mara kept silent, her gaze fixed forward, unmoving as heat rose along her neck. In her lap, the edges of the official ruling bit into her palm. The gavel fell. Papers whispered. Chairs dragged against the floor. As the room emptied, Roderick strolled down the aisle like a man concluding a successful presentation. He stopped before Mara, holding out a thick envelope with her name typed neatly across the front. "We even covered the transfer fees," he said, as if granting a favor. The envelope holds the keys, the property map, and a few notes about the utility lines. "The place is ready for habitation." She lifted her eyes. "I don't want your help." Roderick chuckled softly. "You've misunderstood. This isn't help. It's closure. For all of us." He leaned closer. "Let's not pretend we were ever going to be family. Daniel's gone, and frankly, it's best you move on." Her grip on the envelope tightened. "I don't need anything from your family, but we need you to be gone," he replied with a smile that never touched his eyes. No one moved to her side, not the clerk still tidying papers, not the guard at the door. Even Marcus slipped out without a glance. It felt like watching a stage, empty lights blazing, but no one left to perform. Rain thinned into mist. The sidewalk gleamed under her boots as she pushed June's stroller down the narrow ramp. The wheels squeaked in rhythm with her breath. Caleb waited by a vending machine, clutching her old jacket and a half-full bottle of chocolate milk. They walked a block before Mara stopped under the awning of a shuttered cafe, the tin roof clicking with rain. She set the stroller brake, leaned against the wall, and opened the envelope with numb fingers. The key lay cold and heavy, its teeth worn smooth from age. She turned it over in her palm. Beneath it lay a folded yellow paper, a hand-drawn map sketched with steady lines, and a property deed, thin and official, its ink smudged at the corners. The cabin sat far north near the county line. She traced the map with her thumb past creeks and service roads she didn't recognize. A tightness spread through her chest, not panic, but something heavier. Caleb looked up, his breath fogging the space between them. "Are we going there now?" The key pressed into her hand. Rain tapped the metal roof. She didn't answer. Not because she lacked an answer, but because the moment demanded silence. She let it hang there unspoken. The driveway had vanished years ago. What remained was a mud-slick trail winding between cedar trunks and mossy stumps, just wide enough for a vehicle if the driver didn't care about the paint. Mara parked at the edge of what might once have been a clearing, then stepped out, her shoes sinking into wet leaves. The cabin hunched as though forgotten by the land. Its roof sagged under years of snow. The front door hung crooked, one hinge, split and sagging. Shutters banged softly in the wind. No welcome waited here, only the smell of wet rot and pine sap. She freed June from the straps and hoisted her onto one hip, the baby's breath fogging against her shoulder. Caleb climbed out on his own backpack, slung across both arms, eyes locked on the building ahead. "Is this it?" he asked. Mara gave no answer. She mounted the porch, pressed her weight against the door. It groaned but yielded. Darkness swallowed them whole. Dust floated in thin strips of light, sneaking through shutter gaps. Spiderwebs curtained the corners. A stack of newspapers slumped in one pile. Headlines bled pale by moisture. The fireplace lay clogged with debris, logs long since molded. The floorboards complained beneath each step. There was no electricity. Mara wrapped June in 2 blankets and laid her in the portable crib they had carried. Caleb slipped out without waiting, searching for branches. Mara crouched near the hearth, stuffing crumpled pages under the grate. Her fingers had already gone stiff with cold. The match flickered twice before catching. Tiny flames licked upward, weak but heat all the same. Later, she unlatched the old suitcase Daniel once kept in their townhouse closet. It smelled of mothballs and engine oil. Nestled between the sweaters were folded papers, his keychain, and a sealed envelope bearing her name in blocky capital letters. No stamp, no date. She didn't break the seal. Not yet. Instead, she sifted through the rest. One item caught her eye, a photocopied map, lines traced in red ink margins, crowded with scribbled notes. In Daniel's hand, "They can't know the truth." Clouds thickened overhead, dimming the room. Rain began again, steady and fine, brushing the windows like fingertips. She sat on the floor, legs folded, the map spread across her lap. Her throat ached. Something between grief and rage smoldered under her skin. She had buried a husband. Now she was burying the life they had built. By afternoon, she bundled into her coat and set out along the wooded path toward town. June napped by the fire. Caleb slept on the couch in his jacket, fingers curled tight. The grocery store stood just past the gas station, two narrow aisles, a bell chiming above the door. Mara filled a basket with formula cereal, a jug of water. At checkout, she slid her EBT card across the counter. The cashier, a teenager with chipped black polish, scanned once. Then again. She frowned. "Ma'am, this card's frozen." Mara blinked. "That's not possible. I used it Tuesday." The girl shrugged, already turning toward the next customer. "Says the account's locked. You'll have to call." Humiliation struck quick. Mara abandoned the groceries, barely remembering to zip her coat. Back at the cabin, she scrolled her phone. The signal flickered, but on the back of a card tucked in the suitcase, she found a number: Dr. Helen Ward, Estate Council. She dialed anyway. Helen answered on the third ring, voice clipped. "Ward. Hi, my name's Mara Ellison. I found your card in my husband's things. Daniel Ellison." A long pause. Then flatly, "I remember him. I think you helped him with something. A legal thing. I'm not sure what. But I found a few documents, some kind of map, and a letter." Another pause. "Can you take a picture?" "Send it. I don't know what I'm looking at. Send it anyway." The line went dead. By the time she returned, twilight had deepened to full night. Her coat hung heavy with rain cuffs dripping. She stepped onto the porch, boots squelching against warped wood. Caleb waited at the door, eyes wide. "Mom, the floor here, listen." He stomped. A low groan echoed back. "There's a weird sound. And look," he crouched, pointing to the boards near the fireplace. One plank was new or wrong. Grain nails shining silver. Beside it, a narrow gap had opened between slats, revealing a slit of darkness. The fire in the hearth had dimmed to a slow pulse, its faint light crawling across the warped cabin floor. Mara crouched where the board had come loose, knees pressed into splintered wood. The silence pressed down. Even Caleb had stopped asking questions, his flashlight steady in one hand, blanket trailing behind him like a worn cape. She wedged a flathead screwdriver beneath the edge of the next board, her heartbeat quickening with each creak. When it finally popped free, the sound rang louder than it should have. Beneath the plank lay stone, rough, cold, and shaped by hand. Someone had carved a shallow recess into the foundation. In it rested a small metal box, its edges rust-bitten, wrapped in a once waterproof cloth, gone stiff and brittle with time. Her fingers brushed the metal. It felt colder than the air. She didn't speak as she lifted it free. Her breath clouded the dim room. Caleb shifted beside her. "You think it's Dad's," he whispered. Mara only nodded. She set the box on the floor and peeled back the brittle canvas. Yellowed documents, a folded oilskin pouch, and an envelope with her name scrawled in Daniel's familiar handwriting lay within. Her chest tightened. One by one, she unfolded the documents. The first was a property deed, aged and elaborate, penned in ink, already blurring. The heading read, "Ellison Homestead Estate." Not the cabin. Something else. Something larger. Another paper notarized decades ago listed boundaries and coordinates, some parcels outlined in red pencil. Stamped seals flaked at the corners. A different map stretched across multiple plots of land, overlapping current developments north of town. Mara squinted at the faint writing in the margins, notes like contested line-buried easement, and one phrase underlined twice. "They can't know the truth." Her breath hitched. She tore open the envelope addressed to her. A single line on the page read, "Some things are safer buried." She froze, the weight of it pressing against her ribs. For a long moment she didn't move. The fire cracked, a log collapsing softly. Why hadn't he told her? What had he been protecting her from or hiding from her? Her phone lay on the table where it charged from the small solar battery. She snapped quick photos of each page, careful not to smudge the paper, then pulled up the contact she had saved earlier, Dr. Helen Ward, and pressed send. The reply came almost instantly. "Call me, now." She raised the phone to her ear. Helen answered on the second ring, voice sharper than before. "Where did you get those papers under the floorboards?" Mara said. "They were hidden in a metal box. There's a deed, an old one. Maps, Daniel's handwriting. Helen exhaled hard. Keep them safe. Do not under any circumstances show them to anyone, especially not the Ellisons. Why, what does it mean? I'll explain when I get there. First thing tomorrow. Don't leave the cabin. Don't open the door for anyone. The call ended. Mara lowered the phone, silence crowding in again. She turned toward the hearth, fed another log onto the embers. The flames stirred and caught casting stronger light across the room. June shifted in her crib, one tiny hand stretching in sleep. Caleb sat on the rug, knees to his chest. Then he whispered, "Mom." There was someone at the window earlier. Her muscles locked. What do you mean I saw a man by the window? Just for a second. He didn't move, just stared in. Her body moved before her mind caught up. The flashlight beam cut across the porch, sweeping the steps, the railing, the trees beyond. Nothing. No sound but the rain. But in the mud beneath the stairs, footprints. Deep too wide for Caleb. She knelt, touched the impression. The prints faced the house, stopped just short of the window. Slowly she rose, stepped back, and shut the door with a solid thud. She threw the deadbolt, then slid the heavy wooden beam across the frame. Her pulse hammered in her ears. Caleb hovered near the glass. "Don't," she whispered. "Curtains." "Now." He obeyed. She moved to the side window, tugging the faded drape closed with a trembling hand. Then she dropped into the armchair as though her bones had given way. Her phone buzzed again. Helen Ward. "I'll be there by 8 a.m. Lock your doors. Don't trust anyone before I arrive." Mara read the message twice, then fixed her gaze on the curtained window, glowing faintly with firelight. She sat unmoving, one hand pressed to Daniel's envelope, the other clenched around the flashlight still unlit. The diner clung to the edge of a winding road, the kind that trapped morning fog, and refused to let it go. Neon light buzzed through its windows, painting the checkered tile floor in a faint pink glow. Mara sat in a back booth coat, damp from the mist, one hand curled around a cup of coffee she hadn't touched. The door chime rang. Her eyes lifted. Helen Ward entered with quiet confidence, black coat, buttoned, expression unreadable. She slid into the booth across from Mara without a word, brushing rain from her sleeves before placing a thick folder on the table. "You have it?" she asked. Mara reached down, pulled the canvas tote from beneath the booth, and set the metal box between them. "Everything I found is here. I haven't looked at anything else." Helen didn't waste time. She opened the box, peeled back the stiff oilcloth, and began spreading documents across the table like pieces of a puzzle. Her eyes moved quickly, hands steady. "Original deeds," she murmured. "Land grants. These are old. Real. And if Daniel had legal possession of them?" She paused, tapping the largest sheet, the one marked Ellison Homestead Estate. "This estate covers at least 3 parcels. None of it shows up in the public registry anymore. It's been buried, but this makes it traceable again." Mara tried to steady her breathing. "So it's real, the land. If Daniel held the originals, yes. Which means this estate is legally yours now, unless someone proves otherwise. And they'll try." "I don't want Caleb and June caught in this," Mara said, her voice thinner than she intended. "I just wanted a place to stay." Helen's face softened, if only slightly. "You're not pulling them into it. They were already dragged in the moment your name vanished from Daniel's will. The Ellisons made that choice when they decided what you did and didn't deserve." Mara turned toward the window, watching the streaks of rain blur the glass. Her jaw tightened. Helen leaned forward. "Let me help. I'll need temporary power of attorney to begin the process. It allows me to file the claim and start digging through county archives." Mara nodded slowly. Helen slid a set of forms across the table and handed over a pen. The ink stuttered across the paper as she signed. Helen sealed the documents in a plastic folder and leaned back. "I don't think they know exactly what you found yet, but they're close." As if on cue, Mara's phone buzzed against the tabletop. The screen flashed Roderick Ellison. Her thumb hovered before she pressed accept. Mara Roderick's voice came smooth light. "Heard you've been doing a little digging. Got yourself into something interesting?" She stayed silent. "I think we should talk. Just you and me. Like adults. No need for this to get messy." "What do you want?" Her tone was flat. "Oh, I think you know. There's a version of this where no one gets hurt, no lawyers involved. I could even help you and the kids. That little cabin doesn't suit you anyway. I'm not interested, she said and hung up. Helen raised an eyebrow. Let me guess, he offered help. He offered silence. They paid and stepped into the parking lot. Mist had thickened, curling around the cars. Mara moved toward hers, then froze. Long, deliberate gouges scarred the driver's side door. 5 of them, deep and ragged, as though carved by a tool or claws. The metal curled back where the paint had torn. She leaned closer. Mud streaked the side mirror. A thumbprint smeared across the glass. Helen exhaled slowly. Well, that didn't take long. They knew I was here, Mara murmured. They've been watching, Helen corrected. They reached the cabin just after noon. Clouds had darkened overhead, the wind carrying low whistles through the trees. Caleb met them at the door, wide-eyed and pale. Someone was near the back window last night, he said quietly. I didn't see the face, but I heard them. Crunching leaves. Then silence. Mara exchanged a look with Helen. The lawyer crouched to Caleb's level. You did the right thing staying in the cabin, she told him. Can you show us where? He nodded, pointing toward the tree line beyond the shed. Mara and Helen walked the perimeter. In the damp earth, partial boot prints showed large adult-sized one heel sliding in the mud, as if the person had turned fast. A chill ran through Mara's hands. Back on the porch, Helen clasped her wrist, firm but gentle. This isn't about an old deed anymore, she said in a low voice. They know what this land means. And if you walk away now, they'll take more than property. They'll take your voice, your rights, maybe even your kids. Mara stayed silent, scanning the tree line, her arms tightening across her chest. The county records building exhaled dust with every step. Corridors stretched long and narrow, lined with sagging shelves, heavy with ledgers and boxes labeled in fading ink. Fluorescent lights buzzed above their pale glow, flattening every shadow, making the place feel less like an archive and more like a forgotten ruin. Mara walked beside Helen, fingertips grazing the edge of a cabinet as they passed rows of drawers. They stopped at a long table under a vent that clanked unevenly overhead. Helen spread out the documents from the cabin, carefully aligning maps and notes. Start with land deeds, she instructed. We need any trace of transfer from Ellison Holdings to individuals, especially Daniel's name. They sifted through brittle pages, scanning cramped handwriting, red pencil notations, and faded stamps from a century ago. Dust clung to their sleeves, worked its way under their fingernails. Hours slipped by unnoticed. Then Helen froze. Here. She tapped the corner of a yellowed record. Ellison Homestead. Granted in 1872, passed down through generations, it stayed unincorporated until the 1980s. She slid another page underneath. This one's newer. Legal Trust 2006. Most of it's standard boilerplate. But this, she leaned closer, brow tightening. This line's been covered with correction fluid. Holding the sheet to the light faint ink appeared beneath the smear, uneven but readable. Trust for Daniel E. to be executed upon marriage. Mara stared at the words, breath-catching. Helen straightened. This changes everything. If Daniel was the legal heir and the trust activated once you married, then this land never belonged to the company. It was his, which makes it yours, or Caleb's, or June's. A shiver ran through Mara. She pulled her coat tighter. The air in the archive seemed colder now. I don't know if I can do this, she whispered. It's not me. I don't want to be the woman who sues her dead husband's family. Helen closed the folder firmly. You're not suing for money. You're standing up for truth. They erased you, Mara. You're putting yourself back. The hallway rang with the slam of a door. Sharp footsteps clicked over the linoleum. When they turned, Corinne was there, tailored coat, immaculate makeup phone in hand, as though she'd walked straight out of a boardroom. Her smile was thin as paper. You really can't leave things alone, can you? I told Roderick this would happen. Mara held her ground. I'm not talking to you here. Corinne kept coming. She drew a photo from her purse and placed it on the table. Caleb's school picture edges crumpled and smeared. I think you've taken enough already. You got your little shack in the woods. Why keep digging? Mara's jaw locked. Because it's mine. No, Corinne countered, stepping closer. It was Daniel's. And he was ours long before he was yours. You're the stray, the charity case. Don't confuse courtesy with weakness. She pressed the photo forward, voice dropping to a blade's edge. If you care about those kids, walk away. You know what people like you become when they make noise. Headlines, warnings, court cases. Mara stayed silent. Corinne laughed softly, sharp as glass. Thought so. She turned on her heel and walked off, her footsteps echoing like punctuation marks down the corridor. Helen lifted the photo, brushed dust from its corner. Let's go. Neither spoke until they reached the parking lot. Wind had risen, scattering scraps of debris across the pavement. Mara lingered by the car, staring at the photo in her hand, Caleb's face smudged but still smiling. Helen stood beside her, coat pulled tight, eyes scanning the tree line as though someone might be watching. We're getting close, she said almost gently. Close enough that they're afraid. Mara didn't lift her head. Her thumb traced the edge of the picture again and again, as if she could wipe away the grime without losing the face beneath. Wind pressed through the empty park as she guided the stroller along the cracked path. Dry leaves skittered at her feet, and the distant lake glimmered under a thin skin of ice. Caleb raced ahead, kicking frozen clumps of dirt, sneakers rasping the gravel. The swings gave a weary creak in the breeze, their chains stiff with cold. She hadn't set foot here since before Daniel's funeral. Now, beneath the bare branches that once shaded their picnics, the place felt like a haunted photograph, familiar yet hollowed. She lifted June from the stroller and pressed the child close, brushing her cheek with her own. June cooed softly, nestling into the scarf. Caleb looped back, breath puffing hard as he skidded to a stop. Did Dad really love this place? He asked, searching her face. Mara nodded and lowered herself onto the old bench facing the lake. The wood groaned beneath her, as if remembering when the family had once sat together. He brought us here the first time it snowed that winter, she said, brushing frost from the armrest. You were too little to remember, but this was where he thought best. Caleb swung his legs, considering. Was that before the cabin? She hesitated. A little after. The same week he learned about it. He didn't say much. Just sat here quiet. Said the place gave him answers. Or maybe peace. Silence stretched, broken only by the reeds scraping in the wind. Caleb picked at a crack in the bench. Do you think we can live in the cabin forever? The question lingered. Mara's gaze followed the frozen lake, where ducks tested the edges, pecking at ice. She adjusted June's tiny mittens to buy a moment. I don't think it's forever, she murmured. It's just where we are right now. But it's ours, isn't it? He pressed. She drew him gently against her shoulder. Yes, she whispered. It's ours. June sighed in her sleep. For a breath they existed in a fragile stillness, three figures carved out of winter. The cold eased. The past weighed less. Her phone buzzed. Balancing June, she checked the screen. Helen's voice came fast without greeting. I have news. I spoke to someone from Daniel's old law firm, the one he used before the family takeover. They kept backups of his documents. There's a reference to a revised will. He updated it after June was born. Mara straightened, but it was never filed. No, Helen said. Not notarized. But if we can find the draft in his handwriting, it could still matter. Especially with that trust document. Where would he keep it? Helen hesitated. Most likely in his office. At the house. Mara stayed silent. I know, Helen added more softly, but you'll have to go in eventually. And if it's there, it could shift everything. The call ended, leaving Mara staring at the darkened screen. Caleb crouched nearby, building a fence of twigs around a patch of frozen grass. She watched his concentration, so serious for a child. Sliding the phone away, she let her gaze drift to the hills where daylight was already thinning. Winter swallowed light quickly. They lingered. Caleb hurled pine cones at a frozen puddle. Mara whispered nonsense to June until the baby giggled in her sleep. Nothing pressed in, no decisions demanded, just a brief pocket of calm. On the drive back, tires hummed along icy pavement. Pines arched over the road, their limbs heavy with frost. Caleb frowned at the window. There he blurted. Next to that tree. She followed Caleb's finger. Only brush branches, stiff with ice. No footprints, no coat, no shadow. Just the hush of woods and a ripple in the mist where breath might have lingered. The back door groaned as Helen eased it open, hinges catching like a breath held too long. Mara stepped through after her shoes crunching over a scatter of dry leaves and fallen plaster. The air had not shifted in months. Dust blanketed every surface thick as if the house itself had tried to smother time. Light seeped through a crack in the blinds, catching motes in midair. Kitchen counters lay cluttered with old envelopes, an open coffee canister, a chipped mug turned upside down by the sink. No one had lived here since the funeral. Mara brushed her fingers along the hallway wall, grazing photographs webbed in cobwebs. Her heart hammered harder with each step toward the study. Helen flipped the switch. Nothing. The office door creaked wide, revealing the walnut desk Daniel used to write at, long after the rest of the house slept. Books slumped in leaning stacks against the walls. A pale blue sweater still hung on the leather chair's back, abandoned, preserved like everything else in this mausoleum. Mara's breath caught when her gaze landed on the laptop. It rested exactly where it always had, centered charging cord coiled neatly beside it, screen black. Helen crossed the room without speaking, set her bag down, and pulled a portable drive with a USB cable. She knelt and moved fast. The laptop whirred to life. As the desktop loaded, a familiar image filled the screen, grainy but unmistakable. A black and white ultrasound June curled in shadow. Mara's knees weakened. She clutched the chair. He set it as his wallpaper. Helen didn't glance up. Means he already knew, before he wrote that draft. Folders flickered open. Helen copied files, scanning names. Trust update D, Ellison personal. Will draft Ellison, She Corp legal. Then came something else, a string of unread emails. She clicked. Mara leaned close. Subject line. This needs to stay between us. Sender Daniel. Recipient the Ellison family's law firm. I knew he suspected them, Helen murmured. This proves he was moving against them quietly. A crack split the silence in the night. Mara spun to the window. A sleek black car idled at the curb, engine humming, headlights off. Helen stiffened. Don't panic. Let me call. Her hand darted into her coat. Glass shattered. Mara flinched as a rock skittered across the floor, striking the desk. A jagged hole gaped in the window. Cold air lashed her neck. Helen crouched, shielding the hard drive. Mara snatched the rock. Her hands shook, not from fear of glass, but from the scrap of paper wrapped around it. Scrawled in hurried ink, "You've gone too far." A car door slammed. Tires spat gravel. The black sedan reversed, taillights glowing through the churned dust. Mara met Helen's eyes. "We need to go." Helen ripped the drive free, stuffed it in her bag, and gestured toward the hall. They hurried past furniture that felt heavier than stone. The cold night bit their skin as they burst onto the porch. No curtains twitched. No neighbor stirred. The stillness was absolute. Mara's keys rattled in her hands as she unlocked Helen's car. They climbed indoors, slamming, breath fogging the windshield. Helen turned the ignition. They're watching every move. Mara stared at the paper crushed in her fist. The ultrasound on the laptop lingered in her memory, overlaid now with the threat etched in black ink. As the car pulled away, headlights flickered between the trees. Something shifted in the shadows, then vanished. The yellow glow from the desk lamp stretched long across Helen's office. Beyond the window, the street lay hushed snow clinging to the sidewalk like an afterthought. Within, tension seemed to hum beneath every breath. Caleb slept curled on the worn leather sofa, arms wrapped around his backpack. June rested in Mara's arms, cheek pressed to her collarbone, breath steady but shallow. Helen clicked her pen against a legal pad, then set it down with a sharp snap. "They're not opening a case." Mara's eyes lifted. "What the sheriff says, there's no actionable evidence. A broken window and a note don't qualify." Helen's voice tightened. "They didn't even bother with a full statement." "I don't think they intend to. They don't believe us." Helen leaned back, arms folded. "They believe just enough to stay away. Either someone's pressuring them or paying them." The weight in the room thickened. Mara's arms ached from holding June, but she didn't dare set her down. The lamp threw restless shadows that seemed to inch closer every time she blinked. Helen tapped her keyboard. An old email thread reopened, subject lines dry and precise, property transfer inquiry. Internal memo review. Urgent, confidential. She scrolled, stopping when Daniel's name reappeared. "Here." Mara leaned closer. The email was dated 4 weeks before the accident. Sent from Daniel's personal account to Roderick's firm. What mattered was the body. I've attached documents showing Ellison Global's use of inherited property as collateral without full board consent. This includes parcels never officially transferred from the family trust. Helen let out a long breath. He was building a case. Quietly. A line further down snagged Mara's eyes. I don't want this to escalate, but if I disappear or if anything happens to me, contact Helen Ward. She has access. Her breath stuttered. Helen read it aloud, steady, though her hands clenched on the desk. He wrote my name. Not a lawyer. Not someone trusted. Mine. Mara stared at the monitor, heartbeat drumming in her ears. It wasn't a coincidence. Daniel had planned this. He had known. She looked down at June's tiny hand curled in her hoodie. Caleb murmured in his sleep, turning his face into the cushion. Helen's fingers flew across the trackpad, pulling up another attachment, a ledger lined with transactions, some flagged, others footnoted. Property sales, internal transfers, loans, all circling back to Ellison Global. Mara rubbed her temple. So, he saw what they were doing. He knew what they'd try against us. Helen said nothing, already opening a draft left unsent. Helen, if you're reading this, then I probably waited too long. Mara turned away, chest tightening until her ribs ached. Desk lamp screen all blurred behind tears. Helen reached across, not for comfort, but to hand her a tissue. He was going to send it. Probably the night before, she cut herself off. Mara wiped her eyes and shook her head. He could have told me. He thought he had time. The radiator hissed along the wall, its warmth no match for the chill that had seeped deep into the room. Mara lowered her forehead to the desk, one arm still cradling her daughter. Helen scrolled further. We have enough to turn this into a legal war. But if we do, they'll come harder, Mara said into the wood. I know. Helen didn't argue. She picked up a notepad and wrote quickly. There's a contact I trust in Albany. Quiet, discreet. Through her we might file without tipping them off. For now. The screensaver kicked in Daniel's ultrasound wallpaper, pulsing faintly as if it breathed. Mara lifted her head, gaze fixed on the grayscale form glowing on the screen. She reached out and closed the laptop gently. Helen's pen stilled. She studied her. I just need 1 hour, Mara whispered. Then we go. The clearing behind the cabin lay frozen in brittle frost and blue-gray shadow. Smoke drifted upward in a slow spiral. Mara sat close to the flame's legs tucked beneath her. Caleb pressed against her side. His fingers tugged at the hem of his sleeve, eyes locked on the fire. Do you think Dad knew? His voice came small, like knew he wasn't coming back? Her breath caught as she looked down at him. He didn't meet her gaze, eyes fixed on the embers, as if an answer might rise with the sparks. I don't know, she said softly. Maybe he hoped he would. Maybe he didn't want us to worry. Caleb gave a half shrug, unwilling to believe either. A gust rattled the trees. Ash scattered across the pit as the fire hissed. Mara drew the blanket tighter around his shoulders. He didn't resist, but he didn't lean in either. From inside the cabin came June's restless whimper, fading back to stillness. The wind howled once, then died. Later, after Caleb curled into his sleeping bag and June clutched her blanket in sleep, Mara slipped out with her phone and Daniel's map tucked in her coat pocket. Her fingers trembled, not from cold, but from the weight of what she meant to do. Helen answered on the second ring. I've been thinking, Mara whispered. This town doesn't want justice. Not if it means looking at Roderick. They don't, Helen agreed without hesitation. So we go to someone who will. You said there was a reporter. She's real, Helen said. Old school. Won't print until she verifies it herself. Good. Mara's breath drifted white. Let her see it. All of it. Helen paused. You're sure I'm done being polite? Silence stretched, broken only by static on the line. Then I'll prep the documents, Helen said. We'll need backups, a timeline. She'll want your voice too, Mara. Something real. You ready for that? Mara tilted her head back, stars cold and scattered above. Tell me where to start. They spent the next 2 hours gathering everything, photos of the will, screenshots of Daniel's emails, the trust clause from the land records. Helen gave her a recording prompt, and Mara sat in the dark with a scarf around her neck, flashlight dim, telling her story into the phone. No polish, no tears, just truth. By the time she crept back into the cabin, dawn seeped through the trees. She brewed instant coffee on the stove. Caleb stirred, blinking at the pale light. He didn't ask questions, just sat at the wooden table waiting for his cup like a man too tired to be a boy. Beyond the cabin, birds began their hesitant song as if the world hadn't caught up to what was happening. At 9:17, Helen called again, voice low and taut. They broke into my office. Mara froze kettle suspended mid-pour. What? Nothing's missing. Not the drives, not the files. They weren't stealing, they were searching. Or warning. The place is trashed. Even the couch in the waiting room flipped. Mara set the kettle down carefully. Are you okay? I wasn't there, Helen said. Thank God. But this was coordinated. Someone knew exactly what to look for. We're rattling the right cage. Mara's eyes drifted to Daniel's suitcase near the door, still holding the papers they hadn't revealed. The metal edges were dented. The handle frayed, his name faint on the tag. They're scared, Helen added. So am I, Mara whispered. I'll drive up this afternoon. We need to plan what comes next. The call ended. Steam rose from the untouched coffee. Caleb had gone to gather kindling. June babbled to her bear, rocking it gently. Mara crossed the room and cracked the window. Cold slapped her cheeks, sharp, uninvited like truth, arriving without permission. Something moved at the tree line. Not animal. She stepped back as Caleb's voice carried from the side yard, steady but too calm. Mom! The back gates open again. Fluorescent lights hummed in the town hall, a sterile glare washing over the crowded meeting room. Every chair was filled. Reporters leaned forward with notepads balanced on their knees. Locals whispered behind cupped hands, eyes darting between Mara and the row of council members. She sat beside Helen, hands clenched in her lap until the knuckles blanched. Her chest rose in shallow pulls of air. Helen laid a single finger across her wrist, a quiet command, don't react. Not yet. Councilwoman Lister cleared her throat. We'll begin the public comment portion. The double doors banged open. Motion rippled through the room as Roderick Ellison strolled in coat, folded neatly over one arm, his smile polished as though he owned the floor and perhaps believed he did. He dropped into a front row seat, the sheriff rising to stand beside him. No words passed, but their alignment was clear. Mara's breath faltered. Helen leaned close, whispering between clenched teeth. He's here to perform. Don't give him what he wants. Roderick stood uninvited. If I may, he began, smooth as silk. I'd like to speak briefly as a concerned family member. The council hesitated, then gestured him forward. He took the podium with practiced ease. It's come to my attention that some deeply misleading information has circulated through the press, social media, even here. My late brother's widow has regrettably endured tremendous stress. A chuckle drifted from the back row, one of the Ellison cousins. We all grieve differently, Roderick went on, voice dipped in sympathy. But it is troubling to watch a young mother struggling, clearly not well manipulated into thinking she's under attack. Mara's jaw locked. Her fingers dug into the fabric of her coat. And so he said, sliding a manila envelope across the council table. I've filed an emergency petition for guardianship over Caleb and June Ellison. Not out of malice, but concern. Gasps erupted. A pen clattered to the floor. Children deserve stability, he pressed. Not backwoods cabins and media chaos. This is about their future. Helen's hand anchored firmly on Mara's knee. Breathe. The council chair stammered. We will review the motion, but Roderick had already stepped down, brushing imaginary lint from his sleeve. Councilwoman Lister tried to regain order. We'll adjourn briefly to consider next steps. The gavel fell. Mara rose on unsteady legs, barely noticing Helen gather her bag. She moved down the aisle on instinct, eyes fixed forward, until the cold air struck as they broke outside. You okay? Helen asked. No words came. By the time they reached the car, Mara had pulled her scarf high over her face, not for warmth, but to hide her trembling. Halfway back to the cabin, Helen's phone buzzed. She glanced, frowned. Someone was at the cabin, a social worker. Mara snapped her head toward her. What, she left a card with Caleb. No notice. Just arrived. Nausea rose so fast it hollowed her. She pressed harder on the gas. 10 minutes later, tires skidded into the clearing. Firewood Caleb had stacked lay scattered. The back door gaped half open. He stood rigid near the porch, arms crossed, eyes glassy. He didn't move when Mara ran to him. Are you all right? She dropped to her knees. He nodded once. Who came, a lady? She said child services. Said she needed to see where we sleep. She looked at June and wrote things down. Mara's throat closed. Did she say anything else? She asked if we ever don't have food. His voice cracked. She asked if you ever leave us alone here. Mara pulled him tight against her. He whispered into her shoulder. Are they going to take us? No answer came. On the steps, Helen stood watch, eyes scanning the trees. Wind gusted, scattering the papers the woman had dropped. One sheet tumbled across the clearing landing, face up in the dirt. A checklist. Mara stooped, fingers numb, and lifted it. Marked in red ink under concerns, remote location, unstable shelter, escalating conflict with extended family. She folded the page in half, then again, and again. Cold air sliced through bare branches as they pulled into the gravel lot. Caleb pressed his forehead against the window, staring at the iron gate and the row of weathered headstones. Frost clung to the grass, and the sky sagged low, a solid sheet of pewter. Mara helped him out of the car, tugging his zipper higher before he broke free and crunched across frozen ground toward Daniel's grave. She followed more slowly, breath ghosting in the cold. The cemetery held its stillness, broken only by leaves tapping stone. Caleb knelt at the headstone, resting one mittened hand on the marble. Mara stepped back, letting him be. Her own fingers curled in her coat pocket. That was when she saw her. A woman stood a few rows away, wrapped in a wool coat, hands clasped around a leather folder. Her gray hair twisted neatly at the nape, her posture sharp despite the years etched across her face. She didn't speak at first, watched Caleb, then turned toward Mara. You have his eyes, she said, voice low, almost carried off by the breeze, and his way of standing still when he's angry. Mara blinked. The woman stepped forward. Eleanor Ellison, Daniel's aunt. I wasn't invited to the funeral. Her mouth tilted wryly. Roderick said I'd make things worse, so I stayed away. Mara glanced toward Caleb now, on a bench unfolding the drawing he had brought. She took a cautious step nearer. I didn't know he still spoke to you. Not until near the end, Eleanor said, gaze fixed on the grave. He came to me 2 weeks before the crash, shaken, desperate, said he'd found something big, and he was scared. She opened the folder. I told him to take it to a lawyer. He said he had. Someone was burying the documents from the inside. Her hand trembled as she passed Mara a photocopy. The paper was faint but legible, a genealogy list tracing land ownership back 4 generations. Near the bottom, Daniel's name appeared with a note, last uncontested heir to Ellison Homestead. Protection clause enforced upon marital union. Mara stared. He never told me. I think he meant to, Eleanor said gently, but he didn't want you burdened unless it was necessary. She's got enough to carry already, he told me. A tightness pressed into Mara's chest. Eleanor's voice lowered. Roderick came to me not long after the crash, asked if I'd seen anything. Then he warned me to stay quiet if I didn't want trouble. I may be old, but I'm not foolish. Then why help me now because I stayed silent when I shouldn't have? It's time someone spoke. They stood together for a moment, only the creak of branches above them. Caleb lifted his sketch. Mama, I made this for Dad. Eleanor smiled faintly. He's a good boy. Mara nodded, throat tight. As they walked back toward the car, Eleanor touched her arm. Keep that copy hidden, and don't trust anyone who says they're here to help unless you know where they were the day Daniel died. Then she turned away, vanishing among the stones. Mara slid behind the wheel. Caleb buckled in. The sky darkened. Pale light swallowed by clouds. They rolled onto the road tires, crackling over frost. A curve, then another. Headlights flared in the rearview mirror. She drove on steady. The lights held their distance. Not too close. Not far enough. A black SUV, the same dampness spread across her palms on the wheel. Hey, bud, she said evenly. Let's play a game. Count how many red mailboxes we pass. Okay. Caleb didn't look up. She slowed. The SUV slowed. She turned right. So did it. Her pulse pressed harder. Every nerve buzzed. 3 more turns it stayed. Only when she swung into a gas station lot did the SUV continue gliding past with windows blacked so deep they reflected nothing. She waited a full minute, then drove home without a word. The podium loomed larger than it was, maybe because every gaze pinned her like a rifle sight. Rows of pressed townspeople and curious onlookers filled the community hall, folding chairs squeaking across linoleum. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, bleaching everything in a harsh haze. Mara stood behind the microphone fingers, unsteady as she unfolded her notes. Helen had offered to go first. She refused. It had to be her voice. "My name is Mara Ellison," she began, each word weighted. "And I am here today not because I want to be, but because I can't afford silence anymore." A rustle swept through the room. Camera shutters clicked. No one interrupted. "My husband Daniel Ellison worked for Ellison Global until his death last year. Before he died, he compiled records, discrepancies, redacted audits, property transfers without legal documentation." She lifted her head, voice firmer now. "He found proof the company was funneling family land and assets into shell corporations, including land meant to remain in trust for future generations." Pens scratched across paper. A reporter lifted his hand, then lowered it when she pressed on. Daniel wasn't just following numbers. He was tracing names, connections. He believed someone was laundering assets illegally, consolidating the Ellison estate behind closed doors. She paused, letting silence hang. Helen stood off to the side, arms crossed, gaze hard on the crowd. "These documents," Mara said, raising a thick folder, "are already in the hands of a federal oversight agency. We've provided emails, recorded calls, legal drafts, and Daniel's notes. The truth is no longer hidden." A woman near the front badge flashing local news rose. "Ms. Ellison, are you aware that just this morning a judge froze Ellison Global's assets pending investigation?" A hush dropped over the room. Even Helen turned, eyes widening. Mara blinked. "No, I wasn't." "It's official," the reporter said. "Federal court order. Asset lockout began at 9 a.m. Whispers erupted. Phones lit the hall. Another voice cut through. "Are you afraid for your safety now that this is out?" Mara glanced at Helen, then answered. "Of course, but I'm more afraid of what silence does to families like mine." The shutters clicked again, this time without interruption. Something in the air shifted. Not victory, not yet, but the tide had turned. Helen leaned toward the mic. "Protective notices have been filed with state and federal agencies. Any attempt to threaten or discredit Miss Ellison will be met with action." The audience rose, some clapping, some murmuring, all caught in the gravity of what had landed. Helen nudged Mara gently toward the side exit before questions could multiply. They slipped into the hallway and out to the parking lot. Snow flurries drifted from the overcast sky, catching in Mara's hair. The air carried salt and metal. Her phone buzzed. She pulled it free, expecting a daycare update, or maybe another reporter. One new text. "Unknown number. We know where your son goes to school." She froze, stomach hollowing, as the words sank in. Helen read over her shoulder, expression sharpening. "Don't react," she whispered. "Just get to the car." They moved fast. Mara fumbled the keys, unlocking the door, only on her third try. Once in the car, Helen pulled out the burner phone, firing a coded message to their federal contact. "They're watching," which means we struck a nerve. But it also means we're close. Mara stared through the windshield fog, creeping in at the corners. Her thoughts shot to Caleb and June, their jackets by the cabin door. The sketches taped to the fridge, every fragile piece of normal she had fought to rebuild. All of it could vanish in seconds. She said nothing. Helen slid her hand over hers. "We'll increase security at the school. I have people. I won't let them touch your kids." The message glowed on the screen, poisonous in its certainty. Mara didn't delete it. She only whispered, "Let them come." Rain hammered the windshield in relentless sheets. Wipers dragged under the weight, barely keeping pace. Mara parked across from the elementary school, heart pounding against her ribs. Helen scanned the lot, eyes catching every unfamiliar face, every car moving too slow. Uniformed guards now stood at each entrance, real ones, not sleepy part-timers. FBI agents posed as custodial staff, and a plain black SUV idled near the back fence. No one smiled. In the glove compartment, Mara's hand rested on a small photograph of Caleb during his first week of kindergarten. The picture was wrinkled at the edges, but his grin remained wide, oblivious. He still believed the world was mostly kind. She wasn't sure how long that would last. Helen's phone buzzed once. She read quickly, then nodded. "They're in position. If he takes the bait, it ends tonight. The bait, a set of fabricated documents supposedly hidden off-site, had been leaked through a controlled channel. Word was Roderick had grown desperate. One more quiet sweep, one final erasure, and he'd think himself safe. Mara stepped out, first umbrella snapping backward, before she gave up and let the rain soak her. Across the street, the school bell rang faintly behind the glass doors. A tall man in a trench coat lingered near the gymnasium alley, shoulders hunched, cap pulled low. Helen followed her gaze. "That's him," she murmured. Before Mara could reply, two agents approached from opposite ends of the block, calm but swift. The man looked up, recognized one, and bolted. It didn't matter. A third agent lunged from behind a recycling bin, pinning him against the wall before he reached the street. The scuffle was brief, controlled. Roderick's voice rose, indignant, furious, but not surprised. Helen didn't flinch. She was already dialing. He tried to wipe his phone, one agent called. Too late. They sealed the device in a static-proof pouch, then cuffed him without ceremony. His coat flapped as he fought the mask of civility stripped away. Rain washed over the scene as if the storm itself wanted to erase him. Helen turned back. He left a trail. Messages, orders, names. Mara's mouth opened, but no words came. Mom Caleb barreled toward her backpack, bouncing hood fallen back. Mara dropped to her knees, arms wide, just in time to catch him. He hit her chest hard, breathless, soaked through. "You okay?" he asked, voice high and shaky. She pressed her cheek to his rain-spiked hair. "I am now." He didn't know what almost happened, what had nearly been taken. She didn't want him to. Not yet. June blinked from the carrier strap to Helen, one tiny hand reaching toward Mara. She gathered them both close, shielding them with her body against the world. Sirens faded behind them. Helen stood a few steps away, silent. Exhaustion carved her face, but her shoulders eased. She let the moment hold. "You did it," she said quietly. Mara shook her head. "No, I survived it." Helen rested a hand on her back. "Either way, you don't have to fight like this anymore. You can let go." Mara glanced at her, unsure how. After gripping so tightly for so long, her hands still ached with it. But Caleb's breathing slowed, head tucked under her chin. June's fingers found her necklace, brushing the chain that carried Daniel's ring. For once, the air didn't bite. Only a hush, cold, clean, still. She closed her eyes, holding them both, and listened to the sound of nothing breaking apart. Morning arrived quietly, like a long breath after a storm. Sunlight streamed through the trees above the cabin, laying golden shapes across the floorboards. No guards, no buzzing phones, no hurried steps on gravel, only stillness. Mara blinked, awake beneath the patched ceiling. Repaired just yesterday, the leaks finally sealed against winter wind. A soft thump drew her gaze. June stretched under her blanket, arms flung wide as if to hug the world. On the other mattress, Caleb snored gently, quilt twisted around him, one hand clamped tight to the stuffed bear his father had given him. She eased from the covers and slipped into Daniel's old flannel shirt, its fabric worn thin at the elbows, but still holding. Downstairs, the stove glowed faint with low embers. She crouched, coaxed the fire alive with fresh wood, until crackles spread warmth across the room. It wasn't just a hiding place anymore. It had become home. Her eyes lingered on the desk by the window. Once it had held the metal box of secrets, maps, deeds, ghosts of the law. Now only a single photograph rested in the corner. She picked it up carefully. Years ago, Daniel crouched beside a flour-dusted Caleb after a pancake mishap. She stood behind them, laughing mid-blink. Imperfect, but together. Mara set it down and pulled open the drawer beneath. Her old journal weighted pages soft from use. She flipped past weeks of silence and half-finished thoughts. Pen in hand, she began to write slowly, her lines firm for the first time in months. "They're safe. I kept them safe, love. That's all I knew to do." She underlined the words once. Closed the book. On the shelf nearby sat a wooden box. Within lay folded letters, a hospital bracelet, a dried flower Caleb had once given her. This time she added the chain with Daniel's wedding ring. She had worn it every day since the funeral, through court hearings, restless nights and long runs. That morning her fingers let go without resistance. The lid shut softly, final, but not cruel. Footsteps padded behind her. Caleb, hair sticking every which way, dropped onto the couch beside her. He leaned against her shoulder, staring at the photograph on the table without speaking. At last he whispered, "Dad knew, didn't he?" She didn't deflect. She took his hand thumb, brushing the back of it. "I think he always did. He fixed what he could, and he trusted me to finish it." Caleb looked up. "Did we?" "We're here," she said. "That counts." He nodded, not like a child, but like someone choosing belief. The sun climbed higher, warming the glass. Birds stirred in the distance. Pine needles drifted past the window. Mara didn't move. For the first time in a long while, there was nowhere else she needed to be. The courtroom buzzed with quiet tension, the kind that settled in long before anyone spoke. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, sterile and steady, giving no hint of the weight pressing down on everyone seated there. Mara took her place in the back row, away from the cameras and attorneys, her hands folded calmly in her lap. No security escorted her in. No reporters swarmed her for quotes. She wasn't here as the accuser anymore, just someone bearing witness to the unraveling of something that had gone on too long. Helen sat near the front, polished but unflinching. When her name was called, she rose without hesitation, holding a slim folder and years' worth of buried evidence. The prosecution led her through each document, fake contracts, silent transfers, email trails that pointed back to one name. Mara's gaze drifted to Roderick, sitting at the defendant's table in a dark suit that seemed suddenly too tight. He wore the same half-smile he always had, but it no longer held power. No one leaned toward him anymore. Then a quiet shuffle behind the witness bench. Marcus Ellison stepped forward. A ripple of whispers ran through the audience. His presence hadn't been listed publicly. His eyes never left the floor as he was sworn in, but when he finally spoke, his voice cut clean through the silence. "Yes." Roderick intercepted Daniel's attempts to revise the will. "He told us if Daniel succeeded, the family legacy would be diluted. He said, we had to protect what was ours. I didn't know it would lead to this." A long pause. Then Marcus turned, slightly scanning the room. His eyes stopped at Mara. He nodded. The court clerk called for silence as the judge prepared to read the sentence. A few feet away, Roderick still looked composed until the first words dropped like hammer strikes. 20 years. No possibility of parole for the first 10. He blinked. That was all. Corinne, sitting 2 rows behind, flinched. Her charges were lesser conspiracy and concealment, but the judgment was still crushing: seizure of assets, permanent removal from any future fiduciary position, and a suspended sentence with monitored release. Mara didn't smile. She didn't shift in her seat. Beyond the courthouse, the air felt clearer than it had in weeks. Snow hadn't fallen, but the clouds hung high and pale like a canvas wiped clean. Reporters surged toward Helen as she exited, peppering her with legal questions. Mara followed behind, unnoticed, until someone called her name. "Miss Ellison, how does it feel to finally see justice served?" She stopped the tape recorder inches from her mouth. Her voice was quiet, almost matter-of-fact. "It feels normal, because this should have happened a long time ago." Then she walked away. No parade, no dramatic embrace on the courthouse steps. Only Caleb waiting across the street with June on his lap, her feet kicking against the sidewalk's edge. He looked up as Mara approached, one eyebrow lifted. She gave a small nod. He answered with a quick smile before handing her his sister. June squealed and clung to Mara's neck. Together they made their way to the car, moving slowly past strangers who would never know the cost of reaching this point. From the passenger seat, Mara watched the courthouse shrink behind a row of news vans. The ache in her chest lingered, but something else was gone. An invisible weight she had mistaken for part of her spine finally set down. It wasn't joy, not quite closure. More like a gentle release, a kind of weightlessness. The wind threaded softly through tall birch trees, their leaves just beginning to hint at spring. Children's laughter carried across the clearing that had once stood abandoned behind the old cabin, now remade into a garden bordered with benches and stone paths. A cedar sign read simply, "The Ellison Grove." Mara stood just beyond the crowd, holding June's hand as the little girl tugged impatiently toward the nearest flower bed. Helen joined her, the silver now threaded through her dark hair, catching the light. "You did all this," Helen said quietly. Mara shook her head. Caleb did. At the makeshift podium, nothing more than a sanded tree stump. Caleb straightened the collar of his shirt and squinted at his notes. His voice trembled for the first sentence, but steadied with every word. This place was once empty. Nothing grew here. Now it does. That's what we learned. That broken ground can grow again, and that hope needs somewhere to land. So, we planted. A soft wave of applause followed, not thunderous, just enough to carry. The ceremony moved quickly. A small string quartet played. Local families gathered for lemonade and cookies. And then the announcement Mara hadn't seen coming. A woman in a navy dress stepped forward, cleared her throat, and unfolded a piece of paper. Today we are proud to launch the Daniel Ellison Memorial Fund. This initiative will provide annual scholarships to children in the Hudson Valley who've lost a parent because loss shouldn't steal their future too. Mara blinked. Helen smiled beside her, her expression unreadable, then gently touched Mara's arm. "You don't have to say anything," she whispered. Mara didn't, but her hand reached for her necklace by instinct, fingers brushing the spot where the wedding ring had once hung. Later, while June darted between the garden beds chasing butterflies, Mara wandered back toward the cabin. The door creaked open with a soft groan, no longer from disrepair but simply from use. Sunlight filtered in through newly polished windows. The kitchen smelled faintly of cedar and lemon oil. Someone had repainted the walls in soft earth tones, and there was a warmth to the space now that didn't exist before. She walked to the shelf near the back, unzipping her bag slowly. From it, she pulled out the old tin box. It didn't rattle with urgency anymore. She opened it one last time. The letters Daniel had written, some to her, others to no one at all, rested beside worn legal forms and property deeds now stamped resolved. The wedding band lay wrapped in cloth, no longer hanging at her neck, yet not discarded either. Mara set everything carefully into the refurbished wooden drawer Helen had installed weeks earlier. Then she sealed the box, pressed a label across the top, and wrote in steady pen, "Handled. No flourish, no drama, just truth." Caleb's voice rang out again, this time with excitement. "Mom, they're handing out candy." Mara looked over her shoulder, catching a glimpse of him, waving from the picnic table, one arm already full of wrapped sweets. June stood next to him, her dress slightly muddy, cheeks flushed with joy. She closed the drawer, walked out of the cabin, and let the door swing shut behind her. No weight clung to her heels now. No need to look back. The garden welcomed her like it had always waited. She didn't run. She didn't pause. She simply stepped forward into the light, into the noise, into the warmth of something finally fully new. Some battles are not fought in courtrooms or behind microphones, but in quiet cabins late at night, with a child's head on your lap and the weight of the world on your shoulders. Mara didn't set out to be a hero, she just refused to be erased. This story is for every woman who has been underestimated, overlooked, or pushed aside, and kept going anyway. If this story moved you, make sure to follow our channel for more emotional journeys like this one. You never know, your story might be next.